Okay, good stuff. Looks like we're recording. So share my screen. Okay. Okay. Good stuff. Just gonna bring up my notes here. Okay, cool. So yeah, so welcome everyone to the Friday seminar. I'm just gonna ask that everyone please make sure you're muted. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Yeah, so today I will be discussing the so sorry. Okay, cool. So today I will be discussing the journal article discussion seminar. So what I will be doing in this seminar is we will be going through the phosphorus in China paper. Or sorry, no, let me back up. First, I'm gonna just kind of explain to you like what an abstract is. I know the majority of you are second year and obviously you know what an abstract is, but this might be one of the first or one of the few times that you'll be writing it. And so this early on, we really want to instill kind of just the fundamentals of, you know, what an abstract is, how to write it, what are the questions you should ask yourself. Yeah, so I'm going to cover that in this seminar. And then I'm also going to move on to an example of an abstract and kind of break it down. And then finally, we're going to move on to the phosphorus paper in China. I know it's Friday before the long weekend, so I'm going to not go as quickly as I can, but I'm not going to mess around or anything. And we're going to get this done and kind of get you guys sent on your way. So let's get going on this. Yeah, and as always, for some reason the chat isn't working now, and I'm not 100% sure why. So my apologies if I miss your question on the chat. I would say maybe speak up or like unmute yourself, because the chat just isn't working for me for whatever reason. So I'm really sorry about that. So let's get started on this. So what is a journal article abstract, or what is an abstract? So the abstract acts as a window for the reader to view in upon the quantitative and qualitative information in the document and reflect on its reasoning. So the abstract is really just, you know, a gateway to the journal article. It's the first thing that someone is going to see as a reader. It's the first thing. It's the first thing you're going to see as a reader, but it's also the first time as an author that you have the ability to kind of hook your audience, to bring them in, and to kind of let them know just kind of like what you are trying to communicate. And so what are the questions that we want to answer? So why did the author conduct this study or project? What did they complete while conducting the project, and how? And what did they find? And what did their findings mean? So these are just some general overall questions that you should ask yourself while reading a paper, and this can kind of translate into being helpful to write an abstract. So just some abstract advice. So I would say just break the journal article down. You know, it's really hard to just tackle it all at once. Journal articles are huge and can sometimes be very dense and dry. So it really does help to really break it down and just kind of tackle it section by section. Something else is you should put yourself in the reader's perspective. So when you're writing an abstract, you know, if you kind of finish it and you say, okay, that's good, you should go a step further and you should put yourself in a reader's perspective and say, okay, would I understand this as a reader? You know, as someone who has never read this paper before, does this make sense to me? So an abstract is all about summarizing the paper. So these are the 4 things that you're going to summarize. This is kind of, if you are taking notes, this is probably the best part to start taking some notes. So the first thing to summarize is the purpose of the journal article. So an introduction. So you should give the context to a journal article. You should be very succinct and to the point, no fluff or flowery words. What I like to do is I like to kind of condense the introduction and find key sentences. You can also kind of draw on this from the conclusion. So, if I say, if I'm trying to give the reader context, then I'll say hotspots are really bad for ecosystems. And that might be a sentence that I've taken from one of the key sentences in the introduction. And another thing of context is kind of like, why are they conducting this study? It's fine to say like, okay, we're looking at hotspots, but why? So the why would be, well, it's bad for ecosystems. We could say, well, hotspots create eutrophication. And so eutrophication is the problem that the author is addressing. So, for introduction and purpose, make sure you're giving context, make sure you're introducing the topic, and make sure you kind of tell the reader, okay, what's the bigger purpose? Why are you actually doing this study? And what's the problem that they're addressing? The next thing is the methods. So this to me is, I don't want to say the easiest part, but it is the most straightforward part, because you can look at the methods in the paper, and you can kind of almost break it down and get the key concepts from that, and say to yourself, okay, well, what are they? What statistical methods did they use? Was it a field study? Was it a was it a lab study? And you can just take those methods and then translate them into the abstract. As I said, it's one of the most straightforward sections, but it can also be one of the trickiest sections in terms of not getting lost in the fluff or the details or the numbers. So don't get lost in the details or the numbers. If I say, okay, here's this method that we're doing, and it's over 100 days, and it requires 10 field measurements and 15 different types of samples and stuff like that. That's getting lost in the numbers, and that's wasting space. I could say, we conducted a field study with this apparatus. And so that, as a reader, I would look at that and I would say like, okay, great, cool. I want to know what that field apparatus was. I want to know the specifics of the study. So I read that sentence in the abstract, and then I'm launched into the paper. So readers can find the specific methods later on in the paper. That's probably one of the biggest things I'm going to stress this seminar, is that what I've seen in the past is people just really get lost in the numbers. So make sure you are getting the point across effectively, but you're not wasting space with numbers or details. And so, yeah, so someone is just trying to read the abstract, and they're just trying to skim it and just trying to find the methods they might be looking for. I would say the methods section, more so if you're getting across the experimental design, then that is probably going to kind of meet your goal. Okay, and so next is the main findings. So this is the results and discussion. Obviously, this can be found in the results and discussion section. And so again, what you should do is you should look for key definitive statements in this section. So, there's the results and discussion section are usually the beefiest part of any journal article, but there will be key statements in there. So maybe they'll have a couple of paragraphs, and then, finish off, and then their final sentence in that paragraph will be something like, well, we found X, Y, and Z. It's probably because of this and this and this. And so you want to take those key statements and you want to translate that into the abstract. They're probably going to find a lot of different findings, a lot of different things to kind of discuss, but not all of them are extremely significant. So that's another thing, is that you should look at the things that they're pointing out that are significant. And once again, don't worry about like referencing numbers or tables and graphs. And so usually in an abstract, kind of like the first sentence or the first two sentences of this section are results-based, and then they go into the discussion from there. And the discussion kind of covers like, well, these are the results, but why are they important? And what do they mean? And so finally, it's the conclusion and the significance, where you are going to wrap it up. You're going to put 1 or 2 sentences that kind of just really wrap the abstract in the journal article in a nice parcel. And obviously, this can be found in the conclusions and future research sections. And so once again, you have to ask yourself, why is this study important? What were they trying to find? And then, what was their main objective that they were trying to communicate? And did they communicate that properly? And so just as a reader in the abstract, when I look for kind of, okay, well, did they, they wanted to find this overall goal. Did they meet that? And do they have any future, do they want to do any, are they kind of sending out a call to do future research, with maybe more detailed methods or more data? And so that is kind of a very important part of the abstract, is kind of like, what's the big message? Did they meet it? Let's wrap this whole thing up. And of course, there should be no new information in the abstract. You're not speculating more. You're not, trying to go further and explain something more. All you're doing is you're just taking the journal article and you're just condensing it into this neat little snapshot for a reader to kind of figure out what the article is all about. And so just a bit more advice. So avoid the word I or we. Avoid any terminology you would have to explain. So, I have the term hotspot, hot moments in my research. I will be referring to that as HSHM to save word count. But I will be doing so in the journal article, not in the abstract. So no short forms or acronyms. Use the most important terms and concepts you want to attract the readers, and don't repeat or rephrase the title anywhere in the abstract. It's just like a general rule. It's like a rule of thumb that you don't really do that. Cool. So that is the abstract advice. The chat was working for a second. It's not anymore. Does anyone have any questions? If so, maybe like speak up. Yeah, I don't know why it's not working. Anyway, if anyone has any questions, maybe speak up now. If not, that's totally cool. I'll keep on going with the seminar. Also, as always, you can shoot me an email or anything. Yeah, my apologies about the chat just not working. So this is the abstract rubric. Actually, no, sorry. I am going to try something to fix the chat. Okay. There it is. Okay, cool. I think that works better now. Good, now it's staying. Perfect. So if you have any questions, just fire them away in the Zoom chat. So this is the abstract rubric. It's a 300-word limit. You have to submit as a Word document, please. The marking scheme is this is kind of what I broke down. So context, methods, results, significance, all out of 2. And then your clarity of writing is just like grammar, stuff like that. Make sure it's like coherent, kind of. That's also out of 2. And Brad will be the one marking these. So if you have any, you can ask me, I'll answer. But like, if you have any specific technical questions on the marking, I would maybe go to Brad. And they're due 1 week after your seminar presentation. So your guys' is due in 1 week, next Friday. Any questions about that? Nope. Okay, cool. Okay. So now what we're going to get into is an example. And this, again, like this is going to be a bit of a longer seminar because I'm going to go through step by step and the abstract and kind of what we expect from you. So what we have here is an abstract. This is under 300 words. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down section by section and kind of dissect each section to make sure that that everyone is kind of on the same page for what we expect for each element of an abstract. So to start off, this would be the context. So this would be the background, kind of informing the reader what the article is actually about. So the ecological impacts of agriculture are of concern, especially with genetically modified and other intensive modern cropping systems, yet little is known about effects on wild bee populations and subsequent implications for pollination. So this is the background. This is giving context to the reader of, it's that the ecological impacts of agriculture are of concern. So that's a big, that's a big why. That's a big purpose for the study. And then they go a little more specific into genetically modified and other intensive modern cropping systems. So not only are we worried about ecological impacts of agriculture, but we're also worried about specifically the GMs and the other intensive modern cropping systems. And then they go on to say, yet little is known about the effects of wild bee populations and subsequent implications for pollination. This is, and then they're going further to say, okay, well, we're worried about agriculture, but specifically these GMs on wild bee populations. And so that's kind of the purpose, that's kind of the introduction, just telling people kind of what the article is about. And so now we're going into the methods. So pollination deficit, the difference between potential and actual pollination and bee abundance were measured in organic, conventional, and herbicide-resistant GM canola fields, Brassica napus and B. rapa in northern Alberta, Canada in the summer of 2002. Bee abundance data were collected using pan traps and standardized sweep netting, and pollination deficit was assessed by comparing the number of seeds per fruit from open pollinated and supplementally pollinated flowers. So this is the method section. This is just telling the reader, okay, so here's, we've given the background, but here's how we're actually going to carry out our experiment. Now, as you notice, they're not getting lost in the numbers, they're not getting lost in the details. So they say pollination deficit and bee abundance were measured in organic, conventional, and herbicide-resistant canola fields. They kind of give a general like, okay, well, these are three different fields, but they're not saying how many fields. They're not saying if there's replicates. They're not saying, oh, we did this over 20 fields. They're just saying, here's 3 different types of fields. So it's a general experimental design. What's really important in the sentence, though, is when they say in northern Alberta, Canada, in the summer of 2002, what they're doing here is they're giving a location and they're giving a time scale. So they're giving a spatial and a temporal scale to the reader, but they're not going into, extreme specifics. They're not saying, north of this city, in this in this county, et cetera, et cetera. They're just saying even in northern Alberta, but in the summer of 2002. So when they specify summer, that informs the reader that this was done, outside, because the summer is usually when you do field work, and that it's seasonal. So for my research, I look at 3 different seasons. And so I would be saying, I look at the spring season, the summer season, and the fall season. That informs the reader immediately that, hey, if I'm looking for research that covers the summer period, then I want to look at this research. So location and timescale is very important. Bee abundance data were collected using pan traps, standardized sweep netting. Deficit was assessed by comparing seeds, et cetera, et cetera. So, they're saying, they're not going into, hey, we used 50 pan traps, we used, this, they're not going into the numbers and stuff. So they're just giving a general experimental design. So the next thing is, there's no pollination deficit in organic fields, a moderate pollination deficit in conventional fields, and the greatest pollination deficit in GM fields. So they're going into their results and discussion. So these first few sentences are results. So it's very matter of fact. It's very, they're not saying why and how. They're literally just stating a fact of like, this is what we found. Moving on to the next thing. This is what we found. Yeah, results are very matter of fact. So they also say, bee abundance was greatest in organic fields, followed by conventional fields, and lowest in GM fields. So what they're saying here is they're being very matter of fact, but they're giving a general trend kind of. So they're saying, okay, well, bee abundance was greatest in the organic fields, but it was the lowest in the GM fields. And then you would go and talk about that more in depth in your discussion. Overall, there was a strong positive relationship between bee abundance at sampling locations and reduced pollination deficits. Seed set increased with greater bee abundance because it's an obligate outcrossing species. The lack of pollination deficit in the organic fields likely was due to the high bee abundance rather than a lower dependence of B. rapa on pollinators than B. napus canola. So the important sentence here is they've taken the results, so they've just stated it, but now they're kind of saying like, well, we found this result, but it's probably likely due to X, Y, and Z. And so that's your discussion. You're essentially just kind of telling the reader a quick, well, it probably was due to this. And so me as a reader, if I saw that, I would go, oh, that's interesting. They found this. I want a bit more detail in that. Now I'm going to go into the paper. So overall, it's really about just not getting lost in the details and really summarizing the journal article. Our study illustrates the importance of wild bees to agricultural production and suggests that some agroecosystems may better sustain wild bee abundance, resulting in greater seed production. Further research on why some cropping systems, such as GM herbicide-resistant canola, have lower wild bee abundance would be useful for management of agroecosystems to promote sustainability of food production. So obviously this is their conclusion. They're talking about just how some agroecosystems can sustain wild bee abundance, but there needs to be further research on cropping systems. Yeah, so this is just kind of the conclusion, wrapping it up, kind of saying like, well, there could be further research. Ooh, can everyone just make sure they're muted?
I just toss her.
So yeah, so
play football with the cat.
Just gonna make sure everyone's muted there. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so basically that is kind of the outline of and the dissection of abstracts. Does anyone have any questions on that? Cool. Okay, so time check here. Okay. Okay, cool. So come on, presentation. There we go. So so now how you can submit this. So Brad and I kind of talked about this. Because Brad is the one marking the submissions, we kind of decided to go with a certain format that he likes. And so we're giving you the option of submitting the abstract in 2 different ways. So the first way is this. It's the condensed, just here's the abstract, in all its glory. So that's an example. The next example is this. So you still have the abstract, but you break it down into 3 different sections. So you break it down into the introduction, break it down into the results discussion, and break it down into conclusion. This might make it a bit easier for you guys just in terms of organizing stuff. And so the introduction would be like the introduction to the journal article and any major methods. The results discussion would be summarizing the results found by the researcher. And the conclusion is just the conclusion. So so you guys can submit it in either this format, which is just here's the abstract, or this format, which is the sectioned off different sections format. So either one, it doesn't really matter which, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And okay, now we're going to get onto the article discussion. So I don't think anyone has any questions. If you do, fire them away in the chat. And let's see. So I'm going to stop sharing. And now we're going to start discussing the article. So I'm going to start asking people to unmute themselves so we can talk about the journal article. And because this article was sent out a week ago, I'm just going to assume that everyone's read it. And so what I'm essentially going to do is we're going to go through this section by section. And this is kind of just helping everyone just get bullet points to write the article. I think this is really important because someone might bring up something that you haven't thought of, but in the next, I want to take maybe half an hour, 35 minutes on this. You could probably get the foundation for writing your article or writing your abstract, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to assume everyone has kind of gone through this, and I'm going to call on someone. Let's see. Can I call on Sarah Whitaker?
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. So have you read through the article?
Yes.
Okay, good stuff. Cool. So, and again, like if everyone's taking notes, I think this is probably the best place to start taking notes. So we're going to start off with the introduction. So, if you could just give me a general, statement of, what was something they were focusing on. No, sorry, let me backtrack. What are some key sentences that you found in the introduction that kind of, that you think would be important to include in the abstract? Or just general concepts?
I found that they were talking about how phosphorus has been like massively altered by human activities.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly in China uses a lot of phosphorus. And there has been a lot of data collection about the phosphorus in China, but there's been problems with that data collection so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, absolutely. So yes, so we're focusing on phosphorus. It has a lot of significance in China. What were some of those? What was something that maybe they were saying, okay, well, this is a reason that it's important to look at phosphorus. So yes, so they're looking at phosphorus, but did they mention anything about like why it's important?
They said because it's causing an increase in eutrophication and a decrease in biodiversity of aquatic ecosystems.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Right on the money. So yes, so you can even see, I think in the, in the first sentence here, they say, um, it's been, so uh, the cycling of phosphorus, an essential nutrient for living systems, has been massively altered by human activities. So that's something that they're kind of just putting out to the audience right then and there. They're saying, okay, well, this is, we're looking at phosphorus, we're looking at P. And in the next sentence, what you said, Sarah, is absolutely correct. So it causes an increase in eutrophication, and this creates water quality degradation and biodiversity losses in the aquatic ecosystems. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So yeah, so that's a great key sentence, is kind of the why. Okay, I'm gonna call on someone else. Quinn Rogers.
Hi,
Hey, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Kind of moving on from the eutrophication and why phosphorus is important, were there any other sentences or any other kind of key concepts that kind of stood out to you in the introduction that you would maybe include?
Yeah, I found that they said that um the P the phosphorus cycle has been altered because of the increase in China's population. So they're trying to sustain the food for the population.
Yeah, for sure. Um, you know, this is kind of something that's you know if you kind of look at like the big question of like, why is this, why, that's a good reason, is that like the population is increasing and they're trying to sustain this. So I would say yes, that's important, but I would I would almost be a little cautious with that, to, maybe not hone in so much on that in the abstract, just because at the end of the day, this is a phosphorus paper, and so maybe honing in a bit more on the phosphorus. But yes, you're right in that it is important to recognize that. Did you find anything else in terms of um, uh, just kind of why this study might be novel, or why this study might be different than other studies?
Mm,
And also, if not, that's no worries. We have a bunch of other people to call on.
I'm not really sure about like the whole difference from other studies,
Mhm.
but I know that in the article it says that China's like a major phosphorus exporter, so it affects other countries. Maybe
Mhm.
that's why.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Um, there is something a little later on. Uh, there is kind of where my cursor is right now. So it says previous studies in, so that was a great answer. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So it says previous studies that have kind of looked at this phosphorus in China. It's been limited, and it's been like an incomplete assessment. Biogeochemical cycling is something that you need to look at over decades, because the trends and the falls and the rises of it are very, very um, variable over time. And so if you have a small time scale, you might not capture all the variability, and then whatever your study is kind of looking at would be a little less representative of what of what it actually means. So um, I'm going to call on. So yeah, I'm going to call on. Let's see, Anna.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. So did you find anything that was kind of novel and kind of set this study apart from previous studies?
Mainly just highlighting what you already covered. Like this study quantifies like that one section, sort of like in that top paragraph that you have on your screen. This study quantifies for the first time, to our knowledge, the entire phosphorus cycle across China over the past 4 centuries. But it's like a longer study, as you already stated. So I think that's something that sets it aside, that it's more in depth and it covers a more range of issues regarding the phosphorus cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, right on the money. Thank you so much. So, as I said in our example before with the bees and the fields and stuff, so what I really stressed there was that, the location was in northern Alberta. This happened in the summer of 2002. What's so novel about this study, and as Anna just said, it's, a ridiculously long study. So to get this amount of coherent and usable data over 400 years is incredible. And so that's what really sets this study apart. So that's something that is very important, the time scale. And so I think, as we've kind of discussed, maybe that is something that would be important to put into the abstract and to focus on the novelty of this study. So, yeah, great. So that is kind of the introduction section. You're giving the context, you're informing the reader of kind of what's up, what's happening. Okay, who am I going to call on? Noah? Hey, Noah, could I just ask you a question quick? If not, that's no worries. Cool. Okay, could I call on Justin Rose?
Sure.
Solid. Okay, so when reading over this article, what in terms of the structure of the article, what kind of stood out to you that made it different than just your run-of-the-mill journal article that you would normally read?
That's a good question.
And also, no worries if you don't really have an answer. That's no worries.
I mean, I like how they had a bunch of colored pictures throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. That's a great answer. So the figures in this, which I'll scroll down to now. So this is a phenomenal figure. We're going to talk about this later, but the figures do really emphasize kind of the points they're trying to make, and it makes it effective to communicate their results and the different parts of the article. Thank you, Justin.
Of course.
Can I call on Eve?
Sure.
Hey, how's it going? So the question I want to pose to you is, we have the introduction, but then we have the results and discussion. Usually a paper goes introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. Why is it, do you think, that the introduction occurs first, but then the results and discussion occur second? Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, okay. Am I good now?
Yeah, you're good now. Yeah.
Okay. I think they did that way just because they were using models, and I think it would be really hard to tell the average reader how they created their models. I think it would be easier for them just to jump straight into the results, to say this is what we found, instead of going into the coding and stuff of making the models.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure. 100%. Thank you so much. So yeah, exactly what you said, you guys. This is an important aspect of this paper, and this should kind of dictate to you how much emphasis you should put on the methods when you're writing your abstract. So maybe not too much, and as Eve said, a lot of the methods are models. That's very hard to kind of communicate across 300 words. And so they kind of, I think it would be better to kind of give a general statement of what they did with the methods rather than going into the specifics. So Eve, sorry, I am going to call on you one more time. Cool. So we're going to skip to the methods. So you mentioned that it's a lot of models and a lot of equations and calculations. Could you give me an example of almost just like, and this doesn't have to be like set in stone or super formal or anything, but just like, could you give me an example of kind of how you would communicate the methods, just in like a sentence or a sentence and a half?
How I like if I were to write the paper, how I would put them?
More so the abstract. So kind of like in your abstract, what would be some keywords to kind of make sure you cover the methods without going into too much detail?
I would say that they used a combination of previously used and newly introduced models to show the P cycle in China.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely. It's as simple as that. Like that is a very good, statement that encompasses the methods. You said some buzzwords as well. She said models, maybe statistical analysis, calculations, equations. So just these general terms that kind of encompass a lot of specifics. So that's kind of it for the methods. So now we're going to move on to probably the biggest part of this paper, which is the results and discussion. So I'm going to call on Brandon.
Hi, I'm not sure why my name's Brandon on this, but
okay. What is your name?
Cass.
Cass. Hi, Cass.
Hi.
So when you read over the results and discussion, because it's so big, we're just going to kind of focus on the first part of it. So it says here, we find that P cycling in mainland China intensified from rather simple nature-dominant stable situations in the earlier 3 centuries to complex human-dominated, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just going to focus on that part. So what was one of their biggest things that they kind of found that they've kind of first stated? And kind of how would you almost just give like a general, how would you communicate that in like a pretty concise statement in your abstract?
Honestly, I kind of read this a week ago and
Yeah,
I don't have it in my same book that I have it right now, so I can't quite remember, but that is a good question.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No worries. No worries. So kind of one of the first things is actually, no, I am going to call on someone else. Thank you very much, Cass, Brandon. I really appreciate it. Cool. Can we go to Noelle?
Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
All right.
Good. So kind of the same question. What's one of the first results or one of the big key phrases that they first talked about?
You're talking about the discussion and
yeah, in the results and discussion. Yeah.
Oh, I don't have my notes open, but from what I remember, what I found most about this section was the fact that they kind of took it through history and showed how different economic and political events changed human actions, which contributed a lot to the amount of phosphorus.
Mm-hmm.
And so it showed that it was very clearly anthropogenically linked.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And once again, you're bringing up that time scale. And as it says in the earlier 3 centuries, it started off as a very stable, simple scenario, but then it went to complex human-dominated scenarios in the past 6 decades, especially after China's economic reform and opening up policy was adopted in the late 1970s. So I'll call in I'll call on you again, Noelle. that's a lot of talk about policy and the economy. You know, what would you avoid kind of in that first, if you were to include this in your abstract, what would you avoid and what would you kind of focus on?
I would avoid citing specific events and focus on mainly stating that the trends correlated with significant events.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And those would be like the scientific based events, right? So kind of like just the phosphorus and not the economic stuff.
I think I'd focus more on the fact that it's clear that it's human actions that are causing the dramatic phosphorus swings.
Yeah.
And that the timelines lining up is evidence of that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. So yes, so make sure you're not focusing on the economics, but make sure you are, you know, at the end of the day, this is a phosphorus paper. So make sure you are kind of focusing on what the phosphorus was doing. So, okay, I'm going to call on Will.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
I'm good, but
Good.
I'll be honest, I did forget that you asked us to read this, so
That's
I'm not sure how much help I'll be.
That's no worries. That's no worries, man. I'll probably just call on someone else, but absolutely no worries.
All right.
Can I call on R. Pearson? Sorry, that's how your name is put. Cool. No worries. Can I call on Michael? Okay, cool. Can I call on Lucia? Lucia? Sorry.
Hi.
Hey. Okay, so kind of in this next section here where we're kind of going into, it says changes over natural P flows over the past 4th century are multifarious. Over this, I would say almost like this entire paragraph here. So this is a result, but if you were kind of looking over that, this section here, what are some red flags to you that you would want to make sure you avoided in the abstract?
I would avoid using the specific kind of units from their calculations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
In the abstract.
Yeah, absolutely. Right on the money. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. So yes, so, you know, it says 0.3 teragrams, you know, specifically before the 1950s. It's increased 4-fold before, or, you know, during the past half century. You know, atmospheric P was 40% lower than, etc. And it goes into all of these numbers. That is something you guys need to avoid in the abstract. You know, this paper, you know, can kind of trip you up a little because it has all of this super dense packed results and discussion section filled with a bajillion units and a bajillion numbers. You know, you only have 300 words to communicate the purpose of this paper. So, you know, you need to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of putting in too many numbers. So yeah. So, okay, so now we're going to kind of move on to this figure here. So I'm going to call on Kane.
Hi.
Hey, so when looking at this figure, what was something that you kind of took away from it, and would you include it in the abstract or not?
So I was trying to, when I was reading the article, I was trying to focus more on the actual written text. I didn't pay too much attention to the like conceptual diagram, but from what I could take away from it, I did notice that, I mean, if you're just going by the size of the arrows, like, and this kind of corresponds with what they mentioned, like a lot more of the phosphate was trapped within the actual like land of China wasn't necessarily coming out through like outside of China's waterways or something like that, and like into like ocean systems or something like that. And like phosphate cycles have like little to no atmospheric component to it. So like it definitely does make sense that a lot of it would kind of be cycling through the different land systems. And you can kind of see, they also mentioned that a lot of it came from like phosphate extraction and then kind of putting that through like agricultural methods and stuff like that. And you can definitely see how that's represented in the diagram. But it kind of just reads the whole conceptual point. And I really like how, if you, I mean, at first glance, you can just look at it and see like kind of like the white box modeling of it. But if you want to go into it more, you can actually see the numerical values attached to it. So you can really, you know, track it a bit more numerically as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great answer. Yeah, no, for sure. So, kind of going off of that, you know, in your opinion, do you think you would include, you know, the just as a general for everyone, figure captions in this paper are very like straightforward. Like they really give a good explanation for all the figures. So if you're, you know, unsure of any of the figures, make sure you go to the figure captions. Yeah. So would you include, you know, would you spend time on this in the abstract? Because, you know, we still have all of these results down here. We have all of these figures to kind of go off of. So would you kind of include this, or would you maybe make like a more general statement in the abstract kind of covering this?
I think that goes along similar lines of what Noel was saying, of like focusing more on like still like making notes of how historically like the different anthropogenic like actions contributed to the different levels of phosphorus within China. But like as they noted, like the weight of the different arrows denotes like the amount of like historical contribution from those different aspects.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of naturally noted throughout the paper. So like just mentioning, like without mentioning like more of the like quantitative values, but like just noting where the biggest contributors throughout history were.
Yeah.
That kind of speaks to the diagram as well as speaking to the other like inputs that they give.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you so much. Great answer. So yes, so as he said, you know, it's not so much about the values, but it's more so about like the general concepts of like, well, where is this stuff coming from over history, and the different sources and kind of how that's changed. But yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna move on from this figure to these figures here. So, you know, as we're kind of going along, we're still in the results. There's a lot of results to unpack, but I think just a general thing we've kind of learned from everyone talking is you need to focus on the general concepts of what the results are trying to convey. Don't get too lost in the figures. Don't get too lost in the numbers. And so, okay, so let's see who Alicia?
Hi.
Hey, so looking at these, and I know these are a lot of figures and stuff, but just looking at all 6 of them from A to F, what's kind of like a general trend or what's common between them that you kind of note?
I think the agricultural production has increased.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing that I noticed most. I didn't really look at the diagrams as much as I was looking at the text.
No worries. No worries.
Just glancing at it right now, that's what I've noticed.
Yeah, for sure. I am going to call on you again in just a second. So thank you very much. Yeah, so yes, so she's definitely right. And another general thing for the, for the graphs and stuff is that they all, you know, shoot upwards in the mid 1900s. so that's kind of, that can kind of be something to note. So, you know, once again, it's definitely about the general concepts. Make sure you don't get too lost in the nitty gritty. So I think, okay. Just looking over this quickly. So I think, you know, we're kind of in the results. We're talking about the results. What we've learned is, you know, make sure you don't get too lost in the nitty gritty. Make sure you're looking at general overarching concepts. And I think, you know, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Who did I call on again? Whoever I just called on, if you could speak up. I lost you.
Hi.
Hi, sorry for that. So you said you read a bit more of the text, kind of going into this very large section here, kind of maybe starting from here. What are some of the things that we could start to kind of roll into discussion? So, you know, you have the results, you're stating them matter of fact, but, you know, what's something that, what are some statements that could be made that are kind of telling us why these are happening, why these results are being shown?
I think a big part of it is population growth.
Okay.
How they experience a lot of population growth between like the 1900s till now, and how agricultural outputs increased with population growth at the same time, and that kind of led to more phosphorus getting into waterways and contributing to eutrophication. And that was the main takeaway. It's kind of hard because there's so many.
No, there's a lot
in there that it gets a little jumbled, but
no, that's perfect. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your answer. Yeah, no, for sure. So so it's definitely like, you know, when you're kind of looking from, I would say like here-ish kind of, a big thing that they say is it can be broken into 3 stages: depletion, equilibrium, and accumulation. And so then they're kind of going into, you know, well, why is this, you know, okay, we're seeing the phosphorus increase because of humans, because of agriculture, because of population increase, but what are the mechanisms behind it? You know, why is that? So that's what the discussion is going to kind of talk to you about. So I think, okay, so now we're going to kind of move on to the next part of the discussion, which is this figure here. So let's see, who am I going to call on? I'm going to call on Grace Hall.
Hi.
Hey, so when looking at this, this figure, you know, in the introduction, we kind of identified that eutrophication is, you know, a consequence of phosphorus. In your opinion, would you include talking about this figure? Would you not include it? But if you were to include it, kind of how would you include it?
I don't think I would include it in my abstract because it kind of just reinforces the information that has been discussed earlier in the discussion part.
Yeah, no, for sure. So you're kind of, so you're kind of saying that the text is a little more valuable here than this figure?
Yeah, it just like says it's kind of more like visual representation of the factual data that they had told us earlier in the paper.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Great answer. Thank you so much. So yeah, so, you know, once again, we can easily see from this that, wherever the red is, that's where the eutrophication potential is going to be probably, higher. But as we're getting more into the discussion, it was identified earlier that water quality and eutrophication were a main driving factor for this study. So I think it's important to, as Grace said, not include this figure specifically, but do try and see if they have any, any results that touch on eutrophication, and kind of make sure it touches on one of the main drivers of this study. So, okay. So, and we've already hit materials and methods. So I think I'm going to call on one more person. I'm going to call on Alexander.
Hi.
Hey. So we've gone through the context, the purpose, we've gone through the methods, we've gone through the results and discussion. Now we're on to conclusion. Whereabouts would you say you would start looking for the conclusion part of this journal article? Where would you start looking for the conclusion part?
Like, where would I be looking for the information for a conclusion?
Yeah.
I would probably reiterate the findings and then wrap that into the overall trends that we saw, and how those are related. Like in that last figure we were looking at, there was higher eutrophication in the east, and they also talked about in the eastern coastal provinces, there was a higher population density and per capita gross domestic products.
Yeah.
So they overall had a higher P emissions compared to the western provinces, and how that's seen in that eutrophication figure, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess I'd wrap them together, our findings and our results, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So awesome. Thank you so much. I will call on you one more time. I'll call on you one more time. But thank you very much. So yes, so this is where you're starting to wrap up your figures. I would say, maybe be a bit cautious with focusing on with maybe stating your results and your findings again, just because you don't want to kind of spend any time, you want to make sure that, in the concluding statement, you're talking about, the future research and things like that. So, so down here where it says China is, it starts up here. It was Alexander, I believe. So up here where it says measures that include improvement of aquaculture production, recovery of industrial, et cetera, this is kind of where it's starting to talk about the conclusion. And this is where it's starting to talk about, again, like, okay, well, we found all this stuff, this is why it was happening, but why do we care? Why does it matter? And what's like 1 or 1.5 sentences that you would kind of say to kind of just almost wrap it all up, in when looking at this paragraph here? Like what's something that kind of stands out to you as like a key sentence?
I guess I would say where it says, although still in preliminary stages, it would provide an opportunity for improving China's P availability in the further generations. So you could talk about future research too. I know they said that future research should be done on the topic, like not only like you shouldn't just take I guess their findings as final, and talk about the potential for further research to be done on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. No, right on the money. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate that. So yes. So to kind of finish this off, the conclusion, something that is, is important and that they wanted to do was they wanted to get across to the viewer, hey, this is a big ass study, like we found results and findings that a lot of other studies haven't found. Now we're going to take this information and we need to use it and apply it to China's phosphorus cycle and make it more sustainable. So it talks about a lot that phosphorus is a finite resource, and that within X amount of years it's going to be depleted, et cetera, et cetera. So, they say here, because of this and this and this, it would provide an opportunity for improving China's pea availability in forthcoming generations. And it's becoming increasingly aware of these issues, especially in response to water quality degradation. And yes, as Alexander said, future research is also very important to kind of include. So so that is kind of the article. I think that we went through it in a lot of detail. Oh, sweet, that did take like 40 minutes. We went through it in a lot of detail. Some of your classmates talked and potentially gave you ideas. I hope everyone was taking notes during this. I think I'm going to just hop back to my presentation. I don't really have anything else in the presentation. I was just going to go over the figures. And that's something we did. So some quick reminders is that assignment 1 is due 1 week from today, and that your debate topic selection is due tonight. I think there are 2 groups left, but I believe that they have emailed me. So I'll take a look at those emails and approve your topic. But I think that's essentially it. So if anyone, I think this is a good chance to ask questions. Well, everyone's here, so everyone can kind of get notes and think and stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing. And does anyone have any questions in terms of the paper, any types of specifics on that they want to ask me?
I have a question about the abstract assignment.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there a word limit on it, or like a range that's supposed to be within?
Yep. So there's a 300 word limit. No more than that. And it can be lower than 300 words. So 300 words.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, no worries. The first debate is on, I believe it's the 2nd week of November. So the week of the 9th, I think. I'm just checking my calendar here. So it'll be the week of the 9th. And in that, group 1 versus group 2, group 3 versus group 4. Yeah. Hope that answers your question.
For the paper, are we all getting like different papers, or is it going to be like the phosphorus paper, or?
No, so the reason I went over the phosphorus paper is because that is the paper that you're going to write the abstract on. So
okay.
Yeah, for sure. So that's why I went through it in so much detail, is to really give you guys a good foundation.
Yeah, I just didn't know if it was like an example or anything.
No, for sure. No worries. Yeah, no worries.
Just regarding the figures that we went over, could you give us like kind of like a summary of what they told? Because some of them are kind of complicated to like read.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So, gonna share my screen. So this is the first figure here. And as I said, like the figure captions are going to be your best friends in this, or your best friend in this. So, so this one here is just kind of saying, from 1960, which is when that policy was put in place, that kind of exponentially increased the phosphorus. so it goes from 1960 to 2012. So kind of, if you can see my mouse over here, I'm kind of highlighting this phosphate rock. So, this says that in 1960, whatever the unit was, so the P flow value was 184, and over time it increased to 12,000. And so that's essentially just saying how much this increased for each part of the phosphorus cycle. And kind of what's really good about this figure is that it's not just, it takes into account the anthropogenic factors, like cities and waste and food. So that's kind of for that. And I apologize, I can't remember who I called on, but the person did say that it was the figure was a good way of enforcing the result that was talked about. So, this result was that the phosphorus increased over time exponentially. And that's the main thing that you should take away from this figure. So these figures, let's just start off with A. So, it goes over the 400 years, and you can see that there's a spike in the amount of, sorry, let me back up. So some of these figures, A through F, are kind of related to this here. So you can see that there is atmospheric deposition of P flow, wind erosion of P flow, sea spray of P flow, and you can see that it's very minimal. And then you can look up here and you can see, oh, okay, so there's sea spray, there's atmospheric deposition, etc. So some of the figures do kind of relate back to this big master figure. So, so figure A here is kind of just saying like, okay, well, mid 1900s, there was a spike in all types of P flow. That's like literally all it's saying. Kind of something that I really do want you guys to take away is to really not get bogged down by the figures, but just kind of think of the figures as a way of just kind of supporting the results. Figure B goes into more like phosphorus rock consumption and fertilizer production. So kind of the more like industrial, commercial scale phosphorus processes. And again, it's just kind of saying like, how much of the P flow does each of these make up? So, fertilizer, which is this kind of like yellow thing here, it makes up, around, you can see the increase of how much it makes up over time. But you can see here that the phosphorus rock consumption is greater than the fertilizer production in the recent years. You can kind of see, and this was kind of going back into some people, so for C, some people had talked about population, and that goes into food demand and stuff, which is, again, I'll just say at the end of the day, this is a phosphorus paper. And so, you can look at the demand and the supply, but you can also look at just, so for C, this kind of shows how much phosphorus is like, put into grain or put into, a vegetable, which is like a lot because, the agricultural industry over the last couple of decades has really boomed because of the booming population. And that just requires more phosphorus. And so for D, you can see that, let's see, this is the net P export. So so this is just kind of saying like, over time, you can see that the P rocks really took off mid 1900s because of the policy change, and that it has, it has kind of increased in the recent years. And you can look at the phosphorus chemicals, and you can see that that has increased in the most recent years. That one, so for the ones we've discussed so far, again, like I really wouldn't get lost in the details. I would look into the text in the paper to see how they specifically kind of describe the figures. But I think maybe a good general, how we kind of took the methods, there was a lot of complicated stuff in there. But someone said a good statement is to just give a good general statement of a good general statement of, statistical models and statistical analysis were computed for this study. I think that don't get too lost in the details of the figures. I think something good to say would be, make sure, this study summed up a lot of the results through multiple figures, multiple time series. I think giving a good general statement to kind of encompass these 6 figures is good. And then if the reader is more interested in what those 6 figures are, or what the time series is, then they will take it upon themselves to go into the paper. For figure E, that was that thing we were talking about with, where was it? I think I lost it, but it was just kind of saying that there were like 3 different periods. There was a depletion, an equilibrium, and then an accumulation. And then I think what you should take away from this figure is seeing what each of those terms means and how the paper defines it, if you were to put it in your abstract. And finally, P flow to freshwaters. This is more so on the topic of eutrophication. So, this is saying, let's see, so what is the thing say? So P losses to inland waters due to the lack of long-term observation, P deposition, runoff and leaching parameters, temporal characteristics are smooth in origin using the such and such method. So I think maybe if you took figure F and you kind of paired it with this eutrophication figure down here, this eutrophication figure is kind of communicating a little more effectively what they're trying to say, which is that because of the amount of phosphorus, there's also an increase in the amount of phosphorus loss. Just because it's mismanaged, there's just so much that certain systems can't handle it, so it kind of flows off into other systems. So F is kind of talking about the eutrophication potential. And in the western part, where the red is here, that is like, I believe, like a higher density population. So that would be like more cities, and there would be more agriculture and stuff. And especially the river basin over here, that's kind of looking like a hotspot for a lot of eutrophication potential. And they will go in, and in the paper, they'll go into, what's causing these eutrophication potentials. Is it coming from the cities? Is it coming from the agriculture? I know that was a super long answer, probably a lot of info, but I hope that does answer your question about going into detail about the figures and stuff. Yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions? But yeah, like as always, you can email me. I'm going to stick on here for about 10 more minutes. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good day and a good Thanksgiving, and I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Bye.